Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so welcome, everybody. My name is Jeff Weiss. I'm here as a result of Anita. And just to introduce, we have Patricia, Anita, and Heddy. These are Gerardo and Helga's children, daughters. And I'll just mention a couple of brief things. You know, ever since I was a kid, you know, I always was on the lookout for people that I really admire, because there's no book on how to be a person. None of our parents ever handed that out. And I've been lucky enough to meet a couple. And one of them is this man, somebody who is admired and loved and respected by everybody that knows him. That's why there's 60-something people that are tuning in here, and that's why all of you have come. So you're going to hear a story by Gerardo about two families of similar background, both of them from Germany. One of them on different parts of Germany, and if it wasn't for Hitler and what he did, they never probably would have met. Gerardo's family, his father saw the danger when Hitler got into power, and they moved out of the country. And but unfortunately, his wife Helga's parents, they thought they could ride out the storm. They both ended up in Peru. That's where they met, and that's where they began their life together. And so with that, I'm going to turn over the conversation to Gerardo, and thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Southwest Jewish Congress for organizing this meeting. And then secondly, I want to make I would want to make you hear me in the back?
Is it on?
Oh, it's not on. I don't think it is.
Is it on? Okay.
No, not too.
First, I'd like to express my appreciation for the Southwest Jewish Congress to organize this meeting. And secondly, I want you to remember, I'm 101 years old. I'm going on 102. And my mind doesn't function as well as it did 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. So if I make a faux pas, you have to excuse me. And as Jeff has mentioned, I'm trying to give you a feeling of two German Jewish families who met the events of Europe in 1933 in a completely different way. My father had read Mein Kampf, in which Hitler described his philosophy and what he was going to do if he was elected. The book was written in 1922. My father, being a proud German of Jewish faith, and was in the war for 4 years and came out a sick person, as I will tell later on. I will first address Helga's life, which is the most interesting to some extent and sad, but and then afterwards I will tell the reaction to the Hitler regime viewed for this by my father. Helga was born on May the 10th, 1933 in Berlin. the year that Hitler became the chancellor, and was also the year that I left Germany for Peru with my family. Helga's father, Fritz, was one of the persons who believed that the situation would eventually get better for the Jews in Germany. And in this respect, I want to read what he wrote to explain his reasoning. He said, I'm sure the question you're wondering is why I would choose to stay in Germany for the time being. The answer is simple. I will not. No, I cannot leave my people here to die in the hands of the insane men we find leading us. I accept the unchanging nature of Jewish existence and appreciate that Israel seems to be our salvation as a people, but the community I'm part of need a strong man who will stand up to police and citizens that seek to determine us. It goes to show, whereas I will tell you later, my father took a positive attitude, and this man was a dreamer. And he unfortunately paid with his life, as I will tell you on. Okay, we're going to leave it the situation would eventually get better for the Jews. However, by 1939, the situation has gotten so unbearable to the Jews, and that he feared for his family life and managed to move his family to Belgium. Helga was only 6 years old at the time, but Helga's 7th birthday, May 10th, 1940, the Germans invaded Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France, which was called the Blitzkrieg, which translates in the Lightning War, because this tragedy focused on fast, overwhelming attacks that struck the enemy hard and moved quickly, aiming to defeat them before they could properly react. Anyone who possessed a German passport was arrested, which included Helga's father, Fritz. Helga, her mother, and Helga went to search for him, and eventually they all three wound up in several different camps in France. By March 1941, when Helga was 8 years old, they all were placed in a concentration camp at River Salde, which was located near the Spanish border and was part of the Vichy government, in contrast to the Nazi occupation of northern France. In April 1941, Helga wrote her last letter to her brother Günther in Peru. Her brother and wife emigrated to Peru in the year 1936. When she wrote a letter, the last letter she wrote on April 1941, and asked for assistance in applying the visas to emigrate to Peru. It never happened. We could all read the fear and the desperation that she felt. That is why we believe that Hertha made the gut-wrenching decision to give up her only child to the American Quakers, for she felt that that was the only way that Helga would have a chance to survive. The Quakers had made offers to all the families in the camp to take the children away and hopefully to locate them in safer places. Helga, who was 9 years old, described in a letter how she cried when she was forced to leave her parents, but she couldn't understand why this was second page. Sorry.
That's my opposite.
Good to have my son. Why that was necessary. Approximately several months later, both Hertha and Fritz were documented as being shipped to Auschwitz on September 9th, 1942, and eventually declared dead on or before December 1942. Helga could not have known that she was transferred to a town of Condon, where she spent the rest of the war. She stayed in a little castle at Chateau de Monteleon, which would be her home for the next 2 years. It was not much of a chateau, but a large house with room for 28 to 32 children and 6 staff members, and an apartment for the directress. It was located on a large, beautiful estate, which they called the park. There was a statue of a large lady, which he thought was the original Dame of Monteleon, if there was such any lady. All of the staff members were women, some young and some older. It was sometimes during 1943 that a couple named Monsieur and Madame Lanoux from town started to show up an interest in the children in Monteleon. They owned a general goods store in town, and they were the parents of 2 small children. Although they were kind to all the children in our large household, they showed the most intense interest in the 5 Jewish children. The Lanoux family became a frequent sight. At Christmas time, they would bring a tree and place toys for the children underneath it. On Tuesdays and Sundays, they would invite one of the children to their home and their dinner table. Only the Jewish children were invited, for the others had parents who resided in the northern occupied part of France and sent them packages of necessities and at least corresponded with them. In early 1944, when the war was at the most chaotic and dangerous, the directress took exception with these visits and prohibited them. In the early spring of 1944, the American Friends Committee ran out of money. That meant that the directress, you see, the 101 years doesn't go. That meant that the directress stopped receiving money for the care of the Jewish kids. The Lanoux family kept a good watch over the situation. They had asked the Spanish maid to keep them informed of any risky developments that could affect the well-being of the Jewish children. One night, as the children were sleeping, they were awakened by Mr. Lanoux, who whispered that they should gather all their belongings. There were very little to take. They were whisked away in the car, away from Monteleon forever. The Lanoux family determined to have Helga to move to more mature. The Lanoux family determined to have Helga, the more mature of the 5 of them, stay with them and ask her to help in the care of their 2 small children. The other 4 children were eventually placed with other families that offered to take them all, which was a risky thing, because had they been discovered, the Nazis would have, imprisoned them just like they did the others. Condon was liberated by the Allied forces in August of 1944. The war still had 9 months of bloody conflict to go until May the 7th, 1945, when the Germans surrendered to the Allies. Food and other provisions were still very scarce, and rationing would prevail for quite some time. Helga moved in with Lanoux for approximately 1 year. She was then taken in by another couple by the name of Monsieur and Madame Aka, who did not have any children of their own. They loved her very much and took care of her. They loved her so much that they would have adopted her if she did not have any other relatives that survived. Fortunately, a year after the war was over, when Helga was 30 years old, the brother of Helga's mother, Günther Perl, who had emigrated to Peru before the war, found out through the Jewish organization that Helga had survived, and so they sent for Helga. So they sent for her. Helga traveled on a ship from France to Brazil on her way to Peru. When the ship arrived in Rio, a representative of the Jewish organization in Brazil welcomed the Jewish refugees, and a lady by the name of Mrs. Goldsmith, who happened to be the niece of Helena Rubinstein, the cosmetic giant, and who was part of the welcoming committee, saw Helga, a young girl of 30 years old, traveling alone among 500 refugees. She immediately invited Helga to stay at the home, and being obviously a lady of means, she promptly purchased the new clothes for Helga and was ready to adopt her since she was childless. She was able to delay Helga's trip to Lima for almost 2 months, to the despair of her aunt and uncle, who were expecting her to arrive by plane shortly after her arrival in Rio. One of the 5 Jewish children named Leon Bellina, who lived in California, reached out to Helga at the end of 1999. He had buried his feelings for many years, but wanted to reconnect with other 40 Jewish children from Monteleone. He reached out to the daughters of the Lanoux, Malou and Maté, in the south of France, who informed him where Helga was living. Helga and I never lost contact with her daughter, and we were Helga and I never lost contact with the daughters and visited them many times from 1952 through 2004 on our usual trips to Europe. Leon and his cousin initiated the process to ask Yad Vashem to recognize, which is an organization in Israel, and for having saved, but to recognize Mr. and Mrs. Lanoux as righteous amongst the nations, for having saved the lives of the 5 Jewish children at the risk of their own lives. Helga was pleased to collaborate in every way she could in their efforts. After 4 years and a lot of communication between Yad Vashem and Leon, Helga and the daughters of the Lanoux, the ceremony was scheduled for February 29, 2004, for the daughters to accept the wonderful and meaningful medal and diploma honoring their parents for their magnificent and unselfish devotion in preserving the life of the 5 Jewish children who otherwise would surely have been perished had they been sent to Auschwitz. Helga was already limited in her ability to travel due to Helga was number one. Helga was very limited in her ability to travel due to her health, and because we had our last visit with Matthew and Matei in June 2004, my daughter Tricia and her son Matthew went to the settlement in our absence. I did this with the help of my daughter to write this up because I would have been nervous. I didn't have something which relaxes me. So it's Helga's story is the most important person in the story. Would you like to mention something about Helga?
I think the thing I tell people over and over about my mother, that I mean, one, I always think about what mother's mother must have gone through to have to give her own child to something. I just couldn't imagine that. And then I think about the fact that mother, at the age of 18, had to went from Germany to France to Lima to the States, learning 4 different languages, living in 4 different countries, and losing 2 sets of parents, her own parents, and then the people, the Akar, were parents to her too. And I was fortunate, I lived in France for a couple of years after college, so I learned French and I got to go meet those people. And the only one who was alive was Madame Akar, the lady that the husband had died, and I just showed up after I'd been there long enough to speak French. I just showed up to meet her, and she introduced me that she was in a retirement home, and she introduced me to everybody as her American granddaughter. Which is, she never had any children of her own. So, and the children who accepted the righteous among the nations when I lived in Paris, one of the daughters lived there, and their family, they're the only family that mother really had, because she had no siblings and she lost her parents. And they're just, you hear about anti-Semitism in Paris and the French don't. I just don't believe that. I don't feel that if it wasn't for these absolutely wonderful, unbelievable people, the 3 of us wouldn't be here today. I just want to say that Mom was incredible. She never complained. She was sick for so many years. You never knew her story because she never talked about it. She was just incredible. And, it was nice, that y'all got to know her. We'll miss her, we love her. And, Dad and her were there together for 74 years, happily married. And they were, an example of what we should, be like, Anyway, so I love my mom and I miss her, and I'm glad that you guys are here. Thank you. And anyway, here's the
Oh, no, get it to Jeff.
I will.
Jeff, the microphone.
Briefly, I will make comments on my father. The story of our going to Lima goes back to 1921. The brother of my mother had to leave Germany because he was a professional gambler, and he had accumulated such losses that the police was after them, and the only solution my parents found was to put him on a boat and ship him off to South America. He went to Guayaquil, and I mentioned this so that you understand how is it that my family went to Peru instead of someone else. Anyway, the story begins this way. My dad had my dad was a wonderful human being, and not interested in making money, but being involved in social life. This was his friends. And I had a job. We were living at the time in Köln, and he had a job in Hamburg with a company. And at the end of the week, he would come to Köln to be with the family. In 1933, on April the 1st, it was the day when the Nazis began painting the swastika on their storefronts and requesting and putting a Nazi soldier in front of the store and this encouraging people to go to buy from Jewish people. When my mother saw this, she was so scared that she called my dad and said, "You have to come back immediately," and which she did. My father had a good friend, which was a German citizen belonging to the Nazi Party, which was his close friends for many years, and asked mother to call him to accompany her to the train station, and he would arrive at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. When my father saw what was happening with the Mogenobits and with the Nazi uniform soldiers standing in front of the store, he turned over to my mother and said, "We have to leave Germany. We have to leave not only Germany, but we have to leave Europe, because Europe, according to Hitler in his Mein Kampf, described yeah, actually, I told my mother. My father had a brother who was in the cotton business, cotton merchants in Hamburg, and he contacted him and told him of his resolution to leave Germany. And the question is, where to? My uncle contacted some of the partners in the firm who had a firm in Egypt and also an office in Tel Aviv. And they suggested that he should go to Tel Aviv, to Israel, which didn't exist at that time, to go there. However, my father was not a Zionist. He considered himself a German citizen with Jewish faith, and he wasn't enthusiastic. He received a phone call from his brother the following week, in which he told him that his brother-in-law, the professional gambler, had written him had sent him an envelope, a big envelope, which contained another envelope requesting that he should forward this to his brother-in-law Arno Weinstein and his sister Elena Weinstein, which he did. In the letter he said, "I have been following what happened in Germany and the persecution of Jews, and I want you to come to Lima, Peru. I have made the arrangement with the Foreign Office of Peru to authorize the immigration visa for for you, for my sister, my aunt, my other sister, and the two children. And my father said to my mother when he read the letter, we should go to Peru. My mother said to him, are you crazy? He said in 1928, he had invited his younger sister to visit him in Ecuador, where he had married and had a little baby. Time off. And who had a little baby. And my father agreed to send her sister-in-law to Ecuador. By the time she arrived in Guayaquil, my uncle was in Argentina. His wife received her. He had to leave Ecuador because of the dead fear that accumulated there. Anyway, my mother said, you're crazy. My father was fixed in his mind off to Peru. And within the next 2 weeks, he liquidated the little thing he had. We were not a family with money to spare. We were an average family. And I was 9 years at the time. Well, within 2 weeks, he sent my mother, my aunt, and my brother and me to Holland. He liquidated whatever he had, and on May 28th, on the Boskop on the ship, Dutch freighter, we left for Lima, Peru, where we arrived. And on June the 1st, 1933, we were the first Jewish immigrants because the first Jewish refugees, because all the Jewish people who came afterwards were refugees and immigrants. Some came with, well, anyway. My father had a good job at the time, but he was from the day one he arrived in Lima. After a few weeks, he got involved in the Jewish organization and helping wherever he could. In Peru, okay.
But one thing about my grandfather though, he, don't want to say one thing, he did get involved with Jewish things, and from that point till, people could not get out, my grandfather brought over 92 people. And there were even some here in Dallas, because I did something for Jafera, then I was talking about, my dad, my grandfather, my dad, and a couple of those, we were part of that group or our siblings for that. So we're very proud of him, but he made a difference in people's lives.
Heddy, did they speak Spanish?
I'm sorry?
Did they speak Spanish when they went?
No. I mean, they learned, I guess, but, they just came.
My father became, there were three. There was a small Jewish community. At no point were there more than approximately 5,000 people at the height of the immigration during the years 1933 to 1945. My father became the president of the Jewish community, and there was work to be done in the organization to help the people who arrived. On many occasions, at the age of when I was 12 years to 14 years, those years, and I accompanied my father to when ships came to the port of Callao, of Lima, and a committee received those immigrants which stayed in Lima, but also he interviewed the people who traveled on mostly legitimate visas, but also on illegitimate visas, which were acquired by I don't know what means in the countries of origin. And I did not understand the fear, the uncertainty of the people. Some were there was a group of people who had acquired visas for Bolivia on knowing that they were not legitimate, and they were afraid that what would happen to them. It was my father and the committees who helped these people to assure them that they would be received by the Jewish community and they would be helped and everything would work out well. Like I said, my father passed away. My father was in the German army, and he was an outpost collapsed on him, and he was buried for 24 hours underneath the ground until he was picked out. But ever since when he came out of the war, he was not a healthy man. What he performed, he brought sometimes when the ship came and he went out there and they went, they were destined to Chile or Colombia. He would bring them for lunch at our home. And to the detriment of my mother, who never knew how many people she had to feed. What can I tell them? They were two beautiful people. Unfortunately, my dad passed away in 1952 at the age of 57. My mother lived on for another 30 years as a widow, and how I need mother. Oh, she reminded me. And I quit school when I was 30 years old. For the years 14, the 13 and 14, I made it. I was waiting for my uncle to come to introduce me to place me as a squish, to learn the cotton business. You see, this is what happens. So it goes in your mind, and I don't know what to do. Oh yes. Well, in 1951, in 1949, I went to Europe, and for 9 years I learned the cotton business in Lima, Peru, and in 1949 I was what was I then 24, 34, well, at the age of 23, I went to 24. I went to Holland for 2 years, worked for the cotton firm, visiting, trying to sell bales of cotton to the continental Europe, from Liverpool to Genoa, from Spain to Switzerland and Italy. Anyway, I received a letter from an American cotton firm who knew me and asked whether I was interested in joined their firm because they were interested in developing interested in opening offices in Mexico, Central America, and South America. I was well fit. I was well equipped to handle that, and I accepted it. And I went to Lima to apply for a American immigration visa. I was 28 years old. My dad had strongly recommended to me that I should never think of getting married unless I was able to support a wife and kids. During those years, the 2 years in Europe, I was on a salary and commission basis, a very generous expense account, and I was able to accumulate what I considered a very nice sum of money. I was getting sick and tired of the different girls I met and over during my trips abroad. When I went to Lima, to my great surprise, my dad never asked. I had a very close relationship with my father, and my father never mentioned anything, asked me, but never insisted on telling him anything. And he asked me when I arrived, he says, "You're 28 years old, you're telling me that you have a financial strength to get married. I know a girl here in town which I like you to meet." We were invited the first night that we were invited at a friend's home, and we had a dinner, and there was a little girl of 17 years old amongst the guests. And on the way home, the friend of my parents asked me, "How did you like her?" I said, "Like whom?" He said, the kleine Helga Wolf, the small Helga Wolf. I said, "Dad, she was 17 years old, I'm 28 years old." Anyway, to make a long story short, pressure was put on me from both sides to consider her as a possible potential wife for me. It so happened that I had, after I arrived in Lima, I called up my friends and I invited them to come to my home for a party. And it was May 10th, 1900, and 1951. My father insisted that I should invite Helga. I said, "Okay, invite her." So she came. To make a long story short, everyone, my family, her uncle and aunt, everybody was pushing me to get married. I mean, to ask her to get it married. So finally, on the third week at Lima, I only had 4 weeks to be there. The Sunday afternoon, I went to her home. She lived on the second floor, and I walked up and I saw a man, a young man sitting there with a big box of orchids. And I said, "Am I coming too late?" But anyway, I went in and the uncle saw me. And so I said, "I've come here for the purpose of," and she said, "Oh, but just a minute, where's Helga?" She said, "This is in the living room." So I went to the living room. I said, "Helga, is it all right for you if I ask your uncle for your hand in marriage?" She said, "Yes, yes, yes." So I went back to the uncle and I said that, and of course they were delighted, they were hoping for it. So the next thing was that we had a week left to decide what to do. We got engaged to be married. And my brother, who was the bridge partner of the American consul, I had to go, I had applied through him for an immigration visa. I filled out the papers. I had in my passport am I talking to much? I had in my passport a multiple entry visa, a business visa to the United States. And he was about to cancel that, and I stopped him. And I said, you can't do that because I'm committed to start working on June the 1st in 1 week. It had to be in Dallas, Texas. He says, well, you can't apply for a visa and go to the States and wait in the United States to get your visa. I said, well, I have to. My brother said, he said, Joe, overlook it. And then he says, okay, I hope I won't get into trouble and you won't get into trouble. Anyway, I came to the United States and Helga didn't speak any English. So I just asked the American consul, do you know of a finishing school in the United States where Helga could go to learn English? He says, yes, I know of a school in Gulf Park College, Mississippi. I said, fine. We applied for her, she was approved. And she came to the United States, spent 9 months at the school, she learned English. And then we had to marry then we had to get married for a very interesting point. Helga had, she lost her parents, she had no papers when she was in Peru. And she traveled from France to Peru on a laissez-passer, which is if you're not familiar with it, it's a paper which allows you to travel within for 12 months outside of the country. If after 12 months you didn't come back, you would lose it and you were stateless. So she came to Lima and the same thing, she had no passport to come to the States. And we took out a laissez-passer in Lima, which was a paper, one paper was a photograph, valid for 1 year, travel abroad. So she came. When she was at school, I received one day a call from the principal of the school, and he said, we have a problem. I said, is Helga okay? She said, yeah, Helga is fine. I received a call from the immigration, and they would come for Helga within the next week to make sure that she gets out of the country before the 12 months are over. Because otherwise, she would be here without papers, and where would she be? What would happen to her? So I said to him, there's no problem, send her to Dallas, I get married, we get married, I put it into I was a Peruvian citizen at that time, and I put it into my citizenship, into my passport. So I called the Peruvian consul, explained the situation, he agreed to do that. So the school sent her to me, sent her to Dallas, we got married in Dallas. At the Temple Emmanuel was a quick affair. We went into the rabbi's office. He put down his pipe, stood up, put on his coat, went in front of the desk, married us in 15 minutes. We rushed to the airport, went to the Peruvian consulate, got her invested, got her inscribed in my passport. I took her to the bus station. She drove back to Mississippi, and I flew back to Dallas. 2 months later, I received a phone call from her. She said, darling, don't you think we are married? Don't you think it's time for me to come home? So she came home. and we started a wonderful life together here in Dallas, in Texas. We've been living here for 74 years. Helga was healthy for up to 3 years before her death, and her illness declined. She, like Anita mentioned, she never mentioned anything, never complained about the illness, never complained about anything. She was a very wonderful person. By the way, when we were in Europe, we went to Europe every year. I combined business with pleasure. I asked her, let's go to Auschwitz, and she never wanted to go to Auschwitz. And I respected that. And that was the story with Helga. I can only tell you that the best thing in my life, amongst other things, having 3 wonderful daughters, was marrying Helga. She was unbelievable considering her background. For a child to endure what she did during her early life is almost incredible. That is the in a nutshell
Yeah.
the background of my life. Right?
So, we're gonna do some question and answer.
Actually,
Are there some questions? Anybody?
Have a note, if you have a note card, and you want to write a question on it, we'll take
Or
that.
if you'd like, I'll hand you the microphone here. Anybody?
Give it. I'll do that.
We got some here? Do you see any similarity in the United States today with the 1930s in Germany?
No. No.
What, yeah, say the question
Very
again.
good question. I believe that from my experience, the past 101 years, there is no other country in the world where Jews can feel safer, can feel safe. The situation in Germany and the United States is totally cannot be compared. Because in Germany, it was the German people, whereas in the United States you have a conglomerate of people from all different origin. Germany didn't have the constitution, which is the basic of the strength of this country. I do not. The anti-Semitism has existed since probably 1400 to 1400 when the Islamic group was formed. No, I would not. I would if I were an American. I am an American. I'm very proud of it. But I've been as far as the children are concerned. No, I don't see any parallel whatsoever.
Gerardo, did you know of Helga's story when you married?
Not really. Not really. First of all, I was 28 years old and I matured late in life. So, I knew about it, but this all came so fast. And so that, you know, before they had it, and I did know it, yes, I did know not the full details.
Anybody other question? Yes. Thank you, Scott. Did your family tell you why you had to leave Germany? When you were 9 years old, did you know why you were leaving?
Well, yes, I mean, 9 years old, and I felt like a 9-year-old boy. To me, leaving Europe was an experience, for my parents. I, I didn't understand then what they must have gone through. My father was determined to leave Europe because he was convinced that that Hitler was preparing for the war and that he wanted to get rid of the Jews in Germany. What was the question?
Did you understand why you were leaving Germany?
Well, to the extent which any other boy of 9 years of age did. We're going to leave Peru. Wonderful. It was a change. It was a challenge. And I did not understand like I said, my father was so strong in his decision to leave Europe. And what he did, I forgot to mention, this is very important. One of the things which my father did, he saved our whole family. He was instrumental of persuading all of my family, my grandmother, my uncle, my aunts, all the family to come to Lima. At the same time, he wrote to his friends in 1933, 1934, 1935, come to Peru, I can help you. Some of his friends were well off. They had factories, they had real estate investment. They couldn't relinquish them. And, Hitler, you also have to understand that the Nazis were very clever in demeaning the Jewish people by gradually pushing them down more and more and more. It wasn't from one day from another. There were times when they were able to do things and participate, but basically they were very clever in that respect. People over a period of 3, 4, 5 years were demeaned, and those who protested were put in jail, were put in concentration camps. That applied both to the Jews as well as Germans who helped Jews would be subject to the same penalty as the Jews were. So that's about it.
I have a couple of additional ones. I have a question.
Yes.
Remember the story about so young, and you didn't understand what was going on. It was March.
Oh, I told him as a boy of 9 years old, I went on the street and the young youth was marching in uniform, and there was a guy who was selling swastikas for pennies. So I bought a swastika, put it on, went with him and marched with him. And then you have to understand that at the beginning was that you could do these things. And that little boy of 9 years old, but that was a small incident.
It's an endearing incident. It's a cute incident. In 1933, what specifically did your father see that other Germans missed? Why did most Germans not feel the need to leave?
Well, like I said, my father was 4 years in the German army. He was 2 years in Yugoslavia at that time, in that hospital and so on. He understood the German mentality, and it basically he described it once to me. He says the Germans are either all on top or all down. Example: when Hitler came, they were all up. When after the war, when de Gaulle stepped on the Germans, it's a different characteristic. I mean, this is my personal opinion based on what I heard and what I learned in the meantime. It wasn't easy. I mean, not only for the Jews and for certain decent people, it's certainly bad for the communists, but the communists were persecuted worse than the Jews in Germany. And Hitler, you know, there was hardly any immigration, they were all Germans. And this is again, I emphasize the difference between the United States and probably all the European, all other countries. We are a mixture of people under a wonderful cover of the Constitution, which no other country possesses. And I don't think that any one person can destroy this country, no matter what happens. Okay.
All right, at this point, we're at the end of our program. Thank you all for participating and coming.